I'm here at COP29 with Palle Borgstro, who is chair of LRF, the Swedish Farmers Association. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So how has the COP been so far for you?
Very interesting. It's my first time here, so for me it's much about understanding what's going on and how the conclusions are processed, but also there's a lot of interesting meetings, both bilateral meetings, but occasional meetings in the corridors, and I have also been in one panel and this interview, so for me it's very interesting.
So far so good.
Yeah.
So how does your organization view the role of agriculture in the green transition? It's a big question, but I'm very curious to have your outlook.
I think first of all, before we start talking about the green transition, you have to be clear that the main objective for agriculture is to provide the population with food, globally, nationally, and in the local communities. And everything we do in the green transition have to be measured against that objective in providing food. But then, of course, there's a lot of things we can do in the agriculture sector, but I think agriculture is a bit different to most or maybe all of the other sectors of society. Agriculture is much more complex. In the rest of society, green transition is much about, in different ways, to phase out fossil raw materials and fossil fuels. But in agriculture, that's just one part of it. We have, of course, both the greenhouse gas emissions, but we are also the only sector, together with forestry, that can sequestrate greenhouse gases. We have the biodiversity dimension of agriculture, we have water management, and we also have climate adaptation. So I think from my side, it's obvious that agriculture is much more includes much more complexity than most of the other sectors of society.
And with that said, I mean, agriculture is a key player in this field, on all these fields, and of course they're all interconnected. So when it comes to biogenic emissions, what can you do? What role does agriculture have here?
There are a few things that we can do, but it's obvious that we can never reduce the biogenic emissions to zero, because then we wouldn't have anything to eat. But there are a lot of things we can do for both when it comes to the arable sector and to the livestock sector. And there's a lot of things going on, research and innovation. And one aspect of it is that we actually know, we have the knowledge, we have the technique for a lot of things that we need to do. We just don't have the financing for it. And that's one of the things that we have to find a way forward, to find the money for the investments and to cover the cost. Because I think if you look all over the world, farmers, they don't have the margins and the economy to do these investments by themselves. They need support from both from the political side and public funding, but also from the market and from the consumers. So.
And of course, this being the finance COP, I mean, this could be opportunities to highlight this.
Yes, and we're trying to do that, but my picture here is that the finance discussion here is it's on a different level. It's about how should the industrial countries support the emerging economies to invest in climate actions. But the climate actions for agriculture that I'm talking about, they are more national, so it's a different logic.
Of course,
but still it's about funding and finance.
It is. So what opportunities, if we shift to the opportunities here, what opportunities do you primarily see in the agricultural sector? I know you released a report quite recently.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things we can do, phase out fossil fuels, but the challenges there is if you compare to the cars or the trucks, there are no battery solutions for agriculture machinery, so we are very much dependent on combustion engines, but we need fossil fuels to replace the fossil-free fuels to replace the fossil fuels.
And how is that coming along?
It goes quite slowly, and we need to increase the production of biofuels. I think we have a potential, a great potential, but and we are also an enabler for the rest of society because they also need in some application biofuels. So that's one of the big things. But in our report, actually the main thing and the main cost comes from climate adaptation, water management. I think all over the world we have areas with dry areas that we need better water management, better irrigation possibilities. But in some areas we also need draining because we have too wet and too much rain. So water has two sides of it. So.
And this is, of course, getting more and more complicated.
And then, of course, if we look at the livestock sector and methane emissions, for example, we have possibilities with better manure management. We have to use more of the feed additives for the ruminants, for example, which are somewhere in the process between innovation and early adopters at the moment. It comes with an extra cost, and we have to find probably the consumers to be motivated to pay for that extra cost. So.
Some viewers might say food additives. They might not know. Could you elaborate a bit on this?
It's a food additive that is produced from algae, and when you put that in quite small amounts into the feed ratio to dairy cows, it reduces the methane emissions with about 30%.
30%?
Yeah.
And when do you think we'll be seeing this more in a broader perspective?
I think quite quickly, because we need to move forward on these measures. But talking about methane, I think it's if you look at the broad figures, the methane emissions from the fossil sector is larger than the methane emissions from the livestock sector. So, and the fossil emissions it's a win-win situation when we reduce them. When we reduce them in the livestock sector, especially if we're talking about reducing livestock numbers, then that has to be considered and balanced towards what happens when we change the system in which we produce the feed. We know that grazing cattle, for example, is extremely important for biodiversity. So if we move one factor there, that will have repercussions in other sectors.
So it's also a matter of how you raise the cattle, of course.
Yeah.
In terms of the future climate negotiations, how would you like them to address agriculture? Because it sounds like you're not really happy with what has been happening so far.
No, I think that the agriculture sector and farmers has not been present at the negotiating tables.
And yet we all eat, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But for somehow we take food for granted. So I think in one way farmers have been doing their job too good because nobody really concerns about food supply. We are used to that the shelves in the shops, they are full all the time, no matter what happens. So. But I think here one thing is that you look at the agriculture in from I think different interests very much in silos. You look at the small perspectives and you not see the complexity between them. So, but I think also that, as I said before, farmers has to be more present here to explain the complexity of agriculture and be present at the negotiating tables.
So how can that come about? I mean, what is needed for you to be more at the table here at the COPs?
We probably have to be better organized to be invited. But of course, it's a matter of being invited from the organization's side also. But as far as I understand, if you look at the COP meetings the last 2-3 years, and it's at least, or what's coming in the next meeting, agriculture will be higher on the agenda.
In Brazil, than here.
Yeah.
So when you look at the power that you actually have, I mean, you look at the protests that some farmers have been putting up, for instance, in France. I mean, you do have a big lever to pull. I mean, since we all are very, truly, completely dependent on your work, how do you see that type of action versus the negotiation? I mean, that might be a tricky question, but
I think the main reason for those protests that we have seen around Europe and to some other extent in the rest of the world too, they come from the feeling that the society is talking to farmers, not with farmers. And if we include farmers in the process, I think we will see a much more constructive way forward. So.
Thank you. Let's turn back just quickly before we end to the methane discussion, because as you are probably aware that we have actually right behind you the Buy More Time logo or sign that We Don't Have Time has launched this campaign together with the UNDP. So what are your thoughts on this way of framing buying more time by looking at methane from your perspective, please?
We know that methane has a higher impact on climate than carbon dioxide, for example. But I think the first thing is to separate fossil methane from biogenic methane. The fossil methane is a win-win situation when we reduce that. There is no benefits of that methane. The biogenic methane is much more complicated. It's related to the entire complexity in the food production system. And there are some measures we can do, but we also have to remember that the food that's produced by the livestock sector is not just replaceable with plant-based production, because of a lot of those areas that we have grazing cattle, for example, is not suitable for any other kind of farming, and a lot of the products that is produced on the arable land that we feed animals with is not either suitable for human consumption. A rainy year, for example, when we have poor quality on the grain harvest, that can only go into the feed sector or to ethanol industry. It's not suitable for human consumption. So when we do changes in one place, it will have repercussions in a lot of other areas also. So.
It is indeed complex, and I'm thinking this discussion about the methane, maybe it could also sort of shed light on the complexity of the agricultural system, and also create greater understanding for the different processes here. And I'm thinking also how you raise the cattle, of course, as you told us, the grazing and where the feed comes from. It's all interconnected.
Yeah.
So best of luck with your important work here at the COP and onwards. We are, of course, relying on you. We might not always tell you that we are, and understand that we are, but of course we are. So we need to make sure that you get the support to do this transition as smoothly and as strongly as possible. Of course.
Thank you. We are ready to be constructive.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much again.
Thank you for having me.